versus that.
Yeah, okay.
I think it helps you get along better.
game.
Right?
Right.
Sometimes
We get along so well, and sometimes you're extreme right, I'm extreme left, I'm liberal, you're a conservative, and yet we get along so well. That's marvelous, wonderful.
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
Okay.
Amazing grace.
So today,
Saved a wretch.
like you. So today, what we're going to do.
That's good. Come on, talk to me. Get in that microphone.
What we're going to do is trying to give you a little example of,
Give me an example of
this versus that thing.
what he has said.
didn't want
Come
to
on,
do it.
Hillary, vote for me, baby.
No.
wasn't
I don't
doing
know. I don't know about that. Oh my goodness.
It's the caffeine.
I hope so. I hope it.
Do you like caffeine?
I do.
Why?
I do. I really only like it in coffee. Not much of a drink. Where I come from, everything was a drink. Give me a drink, and whatever you had, that's what you drank. Drink.
Well, I look at it like this. I could call everything a slurp because I like to slurp my coffee.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah. Okay, some people don't like people who do like that. Just
That's their problem.
Well, I'm saying it feels good. I mean, there's a difference between just drinking and slurping. There's something about getting something real, real hot and just barely touching it, and it cools as it's making its entrance. It's not just presentation, but it's the texture of the coffee
Sure.
in a sense.
It's the whole
And the slurping
experience.
process brings in something to me that's a bit wonderful. Yeah, I like
Nice.
that.
Nice.
Slurping. Yeah.
Now, Daryl, we know Daryl. He likes
He looks
coffee.
I would bet that he's a slurper as well.
No, Daryl is not a slurper.
Are you a slurper, Daryl?
It depends. Sometimes I probably do, and sometimes I don't.
I mean, you can even hear it.
That last swallow usually is just kind of a gulp because it's
Gross.
tepid. It tastes terrible. I just couldn't drink it anyway.
Have you ever invited your wife to go gulping coffee?
She doesn't like coffee.
Oh, she does.
Uh-uh.
Okay.
Yeah, she's never drank a cup that I know of.
No,
I got you.
no, she likes tea.
Tea. Okay.
She's prim and proper, so
So she's a tea gulper, right?
no, she doesn't gulp anything.
Okay. Well, there is sipping. Are you a sipper?
I take a sip or two.
Okay, you like to sip
Are we
coffee
talking about
or
coffee?
drink?
Are we talking about coffee still?
Yeah. Are you a sipper?
Let me see. I'm a sipper / gulp. Not a gulper, but I make a little noise as I
No
sip.
slurping ever?
No slurping ever. It's not proper for a Southern woman to slurp her coffee.
Oh, it would be wonderful. Slurp away, honey.
Not that I'm prim and proper. No, that is not the picture you see when you think about old Rhonda Sue.
I tell you what, we have lights going everywhere this morning, but that's fine. Okay, I think our topic is a bit interesting about cheeks and all of that. But
Yeah.
let's talk to Diana for a minute and see if she's actually here. I like her shirt.
Yeah.
Diana's here. You can't get rid of her. She's like a bad nickel.
My question to you is this. Schrodinger is our dog.
Yeah, we
I
have
didn't
a
know
dog.
Schrodinger had a cat.
I didn't either.
And I didn't know the cat was dead. So
That's very
can you
upsetting to
explain?
me.
It's a reference to a physics experiment.
I got that.
was,
I get the thought experiment. That's why we named
But we're
our dog
upset.
Schrodinger. But we're upset about
That
Schrodinger
his
having a
cat is-
cat that is dead because Schrodinger's in our front yard right now.
And he would never.
My,
He would never have a
my,
dead cat.
The front of my shirt says Schrodinger's cat is dead. I don't know if you can see this. When I turn around, can you see Schrodinger's cat is not dead?
I do. That's cute. Yeah.
That is nice. Where
I
did you
got
get
this at a
that?
place called Think Geek. It's an online store
Yeah.
with things for geeky people like me. And this is my
Joey.
favorite T-shirt of all. I'm going to have to do something with it, though. The sleeve is unraveling a little bit. I'm going to have to bind it.
So what did you think
Why?
about the double slit experiment that Dr. Young was doing in the context of superposition? That is, rather than true and false, you have superposition. Because that's the point of the T-shirt.
Yeah, absolutely. And online, there is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful explanation of that experiment by Richard Feynman, the
Right.
Nobel-winning
But isn't he?
physicist.
But isn't he a bit dated in that? Because I mean, experiments have been conducted here more recently.
Yeah, well,
They,
Feynman's
they,
dead for a few years
right,
now.
right. But I'm just saying that many people put that into the context of a color box. For instance, you can take, let's say, photons and throw them in a color box, and from just for the sake of calling them colors. Well, let's not get into that without staying with our topic. But
Oh,
I'd like to talk
it'd be
about
a great-
Schrodinger's thought experiment
Yeah.
because my wife and I, we spent a lot of time looking into the double slit experiment, and we love it. I mean, it was almost as good as Dark Shadows, believe it or not. I mean, yeah.
Oh, it's fun. Now, did you say Dr. Young?
Dr. Young, he is prior to Schrodinger. That is that thought experiment, and Dr. Young is, if I'm not mistaken, he may be the person who came up with the double slit experiment. I may be mistaken. There are a lot of people in physics at that time that are very important to note, simply because, I love, entanglement, what
Oh,
all
yeah.
that means, and it's fun to
Yeah.
talk about, if you have a dice here and a dice over there, when you throw a 5 here, it's a 5 over there at the same time, and so this is where we get into the multiverse and all of that, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about a completely different topic.
Let's stay on topic.
Yeah, okay. In order to get to that topic, let's go to the Bible. Let's see, the name of the show is what?
The Holy Bibli.
Yeah, we're talking about, does turn the other cheek mean get walked all over? And so, what are your thoughts before I jump into it?
Well, I tell you what. I grew up in a conundrum because my father was more of turn the other cheek, even though my mom taught us more of the Bible, but she was like, if somebody pinches you, you go pinch him right back. If somebody hits you, you knock their block off. But my dad was more gentle, and you just don't.
So you
do that.
have a gentle father and a non-gentle mother.
I don't want to put that on her, but and as old as my dad is getting, it seems like he's coming out the woodwork now. So I'm confused.
He's in competition with your mother these days.
So now I just have to figure it out for myself. At 50.
So you're saying Papa's no longer gentle?
No, as compared to. But the thing is, I do think in life we should, I don't want to call it err, but we should lean on the side of turning the other cheek. I just think that's best for humanity. And everyone knows, the Gandhi saying, just, except for me right now, I'm like George W. when he was trying to say. But we don't want the whole world blind. Let's just put it that way. Right? We don't. And so, yeah, I'm an advocate for turning the other cheek. Unless, and I say this a lot, even our grown children and grandchildren, if someone would really do something to, crush them or hurt them, I hope I wouldn't go out for revenge. That would be sad. But I wouldn't put it past me. I'm just confessing. So sad that I haven't come as far as, I should have in life.
Let's get some other thoughts before
Let's
I jump
do it.
in.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. What are your thoughts, Daryl, on this turn the other cheek business?
Well, if it actually, is being literal and has to do with someone actually slapping you, as if that's they're trying to be mean to you, or maybe get you into a fight, so to speak. personally, I've always been or considered myself a pacifist, but I don't mind admitting that you can call it coward if you want to, or chicken. But I've never had any broken bones. Never had any serious injuries from doing something that, in my opinion, doesn't accomplish anything anyway. I mean, if you're fighting professionally, you might make some money at it, but if you're just fighting because you're mad at each other, what's that going to help? And so, in that context, I would say, yeah, turn the other cheek. You might have a little red mark on your face, but at least maybe there's no blood or, broken bones as a result of just stirring up a lot of anger and, in my opinion, a lot of activity that doesn't accomplish anything except injury.
Yeah, you're so right. Always the voice of reason and compassion.
I agree. Okay, Diana, what is your spin, your take, your stance, your position, your view on turn the other cheek?
Well, I don't know if this is exactly an example of turn the other cheek, but a few years ago I was in a situation where there would be someone, it was a prior relationship, and this person would begin striking me. And I would just stand there and say, okay, do it again. Show me what you are. And that would sort of put an end to that situation for the moment, rather than lashing out and striking back. I would just say, okay, here's the other cheek, go ahead and do it. And like I say, it would settle things down for a little bit, at least at that point, until the next time. But would that be an example of turn the other cheek?
All right.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely an example.
When I read what so many psychologists are suggesting concerning this notion, you get one thing, but it's within the context of modernity. When I look at what the ancients meant, that is, in their use of law, and this is very much a Matthew 5 contextual response to the question of the Torah. The Torah is, if understood, and Bob Graves and I had a conversation the other day that lasted approximately 2 hours long, and we talked nothing but First and Second Temple Hebrew. I wish it would have been recorded because I went through a detailed explanation as to what deictic centers were. I went through why people really are tripping over themselves with words rather than focusing on how meaning is developed and shaped within nominal structure, inflected languages, and so on. I wish we had the time this morning to get into that, but we don't. But let's cut to the chase. The prior passage, and let me read this. You've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And so many people would look at this and say, well, we need some equity. If you took $5 from me, you owe me $5. And so there is something about this that, in a sense, is challenging. How do you create civility, let's say, within a community without having a sense of equity? In other words, if someone wrongs you and you take it to court, or someone owes you money or whatever, there's got to be something that, in principle, that gives to each individual something that's sustainable, and something can come in the form of punishment or something can come in the form of correction. And I think that what Jesus was offering in Matthew 5 wasn't a punishment narrative, but he was speaking specifically to a corrective narrative. In other words, if you want to approach this with the lens of talking about punishing people, we can talk about that. But if you want to talk about corrective behavior, something that would do something for someone else besides yourself, why don't we look at an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth differently? And so if we continue to read this,
Well, can I summarize a little bit? So are you saying that the law is more directed at punishment instead of correcting
No.
or discipline?
okay, when we talk about the law more specifically, Torah in this context.
Right, that's what I was.
The Torah is not, and this is why I don't like the great debate, because most people who speak about the Torah are abysmally ignorant as to how it is written and shaped and formed. When you look at an abjad, when you look at a nominal structured language, especially in First and Second Temple Hebrew, this is a language without tense, and that's very important because anytime that you get into aspect, you're looking at what's happening from the standpoint of vantage point. In other words, the author of whatever is simply saying, look at this or that from a certain vantage point rather than being time sensitive. The Greeks, they use what's called action sart. Only in the present tense do we have a sense of time sensitivity. With all the other issues of tense within Greek, we have something called action sart. It's kind of action, not time of action. And so in Hebrew, it's much different. It's not time of action, nor is it kind of action. It's from the vantage point. In other words, is there a difference between the person watching the parade from the sidewalk, or from standing on the float, or from being in a helicopter,
Sure.
or being the manager of the parade inside of a building somewhere where he can't see the parade, but
Calling the
he's
shots.
calling all the shots.
Yeah.
And this is why we have this LXX. When you get into the Greek rendering, many people think that that's a translation of the Old Testament Hebrew, and it's not a translation of the Hebrew text. It's a translation of an interpretation of the Hebrew text, because the Hebrew text was designed to be interpreted various ways and all be right. There was no sense of right and wrong, by the way, for the record. In the Torah, it's not an issue of right and wrong. It's an issue of looking at this from various vantage points. And so when people attack, namely the Torah, most of the people who do so ignorantly, because in the Torah, the reason that it's written poetically, it's to suggest to 12 tribes, you guys are coming to the table with 12 different norms. You guys are not going to want to agree. You're probably going to fight one another. And so the question would be, if you want to settle this eye for an eye in principle, what are you going to do when someone wants to do evil to you? And this translation says, but I say, do not resist an evil doer. Okay, what does that mean? Well, in the Greek text and in the Hebrew, it would lean in this direction. If you have something to settle with another person, do you want something that will create more conflict with an evil person? I've heard you say so many times, anytime that you have someone doing something wrong and you create more conflict with that person who has done you wrong, this is going to get something that is sustained that you don't want to mess with. In other words, how can you put out the fire? As long as you stir the fire, it's going to get hotter and hotter. And so Jesus is approaching, namely the Torah, from the standpoint of how do we put out fires? We can't put out violence theories. In other words, some people think that you can settle violence with violence. You can put it down with violence. That's one way of looking at it. And Jesus was certainly not trying to author a law, but simply trying to render something for the context of something useful, not something, this is the better way of stating this. That wasn't the context. And so both in Greek and both in Hebrew, you have modeling of behavior. You do not have, thus saith the Lord thy God. Anytime that God was used in the Torah and also in the Gospels, it's mostly a rhetorical device. And this is why I think the debate is full of people who are just full of it. They want to attack God, not God, or yes, God, and all of that. It's ridiculous, and it's because people are not committed to a process. They're committed to conclusions, and they are trying to confirm their conclusions rather than, kicking back a bit and saying, let me look at it differently. And so what is this suggesting? By the time we get to Matthew 5:38 and then 39, It's simply saying, what are we going to do with this eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth situation? We need to learn how to resolve this without creating further conflict. And I think most people today in our context would agree with that. Now, others are a bit more hawkish. We see that this is a less hawkish standpoint, and so Jesus would probably be classified as a liberal today by most people if people understood Jesus. And so maybe that's a good explanation, maybe it's not, but it doesn't address if someone slaps you on one cheek, because in that context of law, the law was talking about if you and I are having a discussion and we're out in the marketplace, there were several ways of saying, I don't agree with you. And these people were into a lot of non-linguistic responses. In other words, they would spit on you. You read about that in the text. You could spit on someone. That means, no, I don't agree with you. Or you could pull their beard.
Yeah, I'm thinking just
Or you
a
could
no
slap them.
would be fine.
Well, I understand that, but there was a point to all of this, because when you were having argument, and it would be like, what do you do? And Jesus was trying to say something like you're saying, a simple no. In other words, turn the other cheek. Don't strike back, because what you're doing, when you see atheists and theists get together, they try to throw each other under the bus. Jesus was saying, why do that? Why throw each other under the bus? And so, do you want to continue this striking? Is that the point of argument, or is the point of argument having a discussion and not slapping one another? And so the first person to strike, or the first person to spit, or the first person to pull the beard, don't pull it back. You don't have to be like that. You can handle this with rhetoric. And so I think that the context is, if you slap me as a point of saying, I don't agree with you, or whatever in, let's say, discourse, if you're saying, hey, don't respond to that, that's one thing. However, psychologists, and I pulled up Dr. Abrams, and I wanted to read a couple of things because I think that he's very smart. He said, when someone attacks us, abuses us, and this is not what Jesus was talking about. He's not talking about people who come and try to abuse us, but Dr. Abrams is. When someone attacks us, abuses us, or even disrespects us, no one benefits by our turning the other cheek. So he's very explicit concerning that mentality. He said turning the other cheek, meaning in the biblical sense, and he doesn't know the Bible, and it's obvious, that upon being struck we should offer our attacker. Now, there's one thing to have, let's say, rhetoric fueled in a debate or whatever, as opposed to what this psychologist is offering. So he doesn't know the Bible, it's obvious. Our other cheek to strike as well, a way of representing our commitment to an extreme form of pacifism, in which we are willing to allow ourselves to come to harm rather than taking measures to protect ourselves that require us to harm someone else. For the following reasons, I do not consider behavior neither compassionate nor moral. Number one, just because it's our life we may be defending doesn't make it a life any less valuable or deserving of being defended. In other words, in principle, what he's suggesting is that when you turn the other cheek and you become this pacifist, in a sense, you're diminishing your value. And so he's looking at a spectrum in which it would suggest that if you don't strike back, if you don't put a stop to the abuser, in a sense, you're giving that abuser permission to do this to you again and again and again. And he's simply saying subconsciously, you may not value yourself as much as you should. And so he's coming from a different spectrum. And please understand, this is simply a vantage point. Number two, he says, in refusing to defend ourselves against bullying, abuse, or disrespect, we fail to correct our abuser's behavior, to communicate the important idea that the mistreatment of others is wrong. And failing in this way, we actually lack compassion for our abuser. Interesting. Who will likely suffer in the future in some way for not having learned this important lesson. For instance, kids growing up, if Connor, our grandson, doesn't, in a sense, stop the bullying, the person continues and later on in life, really gets hurt because of the bullying. And so if Connor can somehow say, let's stop, that may be good for both.
Yeah, because I'm not going to say names, but
Right.
he has a little friend that will
Push him around.
push him around. And so we don't know what to do about it. Let him figure it out. Then my mom finally is like, you need to, strike back.
So
And-
my mother-in-law is actually teaching my grandson how to strike, okay?
Yeah, but he cries and he says, but I don't want to hit him.
Please don't make me, Nan.
And so I'm thinking, well, he has more sense than all of us. He why teach a child to be, I don't know, aggressive like that? Or is that aggressive?
Well, let me finish reading this. He says, not only that we lack compassion for our bully's future victims. In other words, if you don't stop the bully, what's the outcome? And he goes on, he says, whom we might have helped spare similar abuse by demonstrating with our lives that abusive behavior is wrong and won't be tolerated, that such a lesson is guaranteed to stick as a result of our standing up for ourselves, in no way frees us from the obligation to try to teach it. Let me read two more. Number 3, in allowing ourselves to be abused, we role model victimization for others who watch and learn from us. Number 4, in allowing ourselves to be abused, we harm those who love us. What parent doesn't suffer because his or her child is victimized by a bully? And so this person is offering a different viewpoint. I don't think that it's different than Jesus, but I think he's looking at it from a different vantage point than Jesus. Jesus, in principle, was looking at it through one lens, whereas, Dr. Abrams, he's looking at it through another lens. And so this is not about what is right and about what is wrong. This is more or less about what would be, something that would produce a better outcome. In other words, in various situations. And so maybe I've said enough.
Well, I mean, Daryl, what do you think? Because obviously it could be a teaching time, but at the end of the day, I would have to say the person that has the most integrity in a way is one that can withstand and, you know what I'm saying, Daryl? And not be the person.
Well, I'll kind of look at it like this, especially if you're talking about relationship and friendship. If someone thinks that in a relationship or in a friendship, they can be abusive to another at will or just, as they see fit, then I would say to that person, find another friend. I'm not
Right.
if you want friendship, if you want relationship here, it doesn't work that way. And now that person, that's not necessarily going to correct them. They may find what they term a friend, another one that they can abuse.
Yeah.
But I've had experience in the past that is, I guess, somewhat unique. I was the kind of guy, like I've already said, I've always avoided conflict at all costs, any way I could. And there was a time when I was in high school that one of my classmates was trying to join one of these tough guy clubs. And in order to do that, he had to kick somebody's butt, And he decided to get somebody that he thought would be real easy, and that would be me. And it probably would have been for him if I'd have, taken him in the fight. But I refused to. He was trying to pick a fight with me, during class time and in between classes. And the next thing I knew, one of my classmates hit him in the face.
Oh,
And why don't you leave him alone? He said, it's obvious he doesn't want to fight. Pick on somebody that, is willing to fight you or whatever. And this came out of nowhere. I didn't even know the guy that did it. he just saw what was going on. We went into class, and I didn't know even how to respond to this. I told him, "Thank you." Next thing that I knew, some guy was out in the hall giving him the finger. So he walked out, and he comes back in, and I said, "What happened?" He said, "Oh, I'm supposed to fight him after school." So after school, they fought, and this guy that took up for me got his butt kicked. I had to find out his name, and I called him to see if he was okay. Yeah, I'm a little sore, but I'm okay. And I said, well, I guess tomorrow, I can't have other people doing my fighting, so I guess I'll fight him. And he encouraged me. He said, it's not all that bad, Well, I happened to see the other guy was sitting on top of him, pounding his face, and I just turned and walked away. I mean, you got, people just surrounding this so-called fight.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, I go to school the next day, and one of my older brother's friend, Curtis, by the way, he sees me in the hallway, grabs my arm, and he says, "Hey, I hear you're supposed to fight so-and-so after school today, or you said you're going to fight him." I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Don't worry about it. It's taken care of." Okay. And I never heard anything else out of this other guy. But after school that day, this particular tough guy club was fighting this particular tough guy club. And there was a big gang fight. I went home. I didn't even care what the outcome was.
You were watching Batman with some popcorn.
But, what I took away from that is that there was people that respected my position enough to say, leave this guy out of it. This is not his thing, And, I don't know that would be the outcome most of the time or in any other case. I don't know. That's just one incident in my life. But to this day, I've never had to engage in that kind of activity to prove anything or correct anything so far. And there, according to this psychologist, there may be a lot of guys running around out there that would have been corrected if I'd have corrected them somehow. I don't know if he means become, slap the other cheek, or I'm not
Right,
sure.
yeah. Don't turn it, slap it.
How do I correct these people? Bully
Yeah.
them? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well,
It's-
the sad thing is or rather the poor decision that I made was only to quote some of his work. He's certainly not trying to advocate violence, but he's simply saying that, when a person keeps getting hit, to give other people permission to keep on hitting you, that's not doing anything good for you. There has to be a point, and we can pretend like there's never a time in which we should defend ourselves. And he's simply saying that there are times in our lives in which we might have to strike back. And we don't need to feel obligated. In other words, one of the things that I've learned over the years is not to feel obligated to the dictates, let's say, of a particular doctrine found within the biblical passages. I'm looking for balance. There's a time to, let's say, strike back. There's a time not to. And so I think that, in a sense, my mother-in-law has a lot of wisdom in that she's not trying to teach my grandson how to commit violent acts. She's just trying to suggest something in a very nuanced way. Listen, if you do this to me, this has got to stop. And so it's like you said a few minutes ago, if you want to do this to me, I'm not going to be your friend. That may be the response. In other words, you took a stand. You made the point. And some of these bullies, they bully for various reasons, and typically we don't know why, but after a long period of time, it may be, they just want, acceptance by one group or another group. When I was first in school back in elementary, my first school that I ever went to, we had 13 white people. And if you don't think that I wasn't bullied, you don't know the history. This wasn't an issue of racism. This was just an issue of the environment that we were in. There were many gangs. And so I learned something that my uncle taught wisely. He said that a good run is better than a bad stand. And I agree with him, and I understand what it feels like to have 5 or 6 people beating you up. I've gone through that several times throughout my life of going to school. And so as a very young kid, I finally had to learn how to push back a bit. In other words, stand your ground. It's time to say no to all of the violence, because, running gets you away sometimes, but sometimes you're left in the gutter. And I've been left in the gutter bleeding, and that's not my favorite place to be. And so I'm not head over heels about just looking at this one way, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does, absolutely. It took me a long time to come to a point where I knew what to do and when. There are absolutely times where you've got to strike back,
Right.
because that's the only language that your adversary may understand. The other thing, though, is that's one thing you reserve for special occasions, because it's more effective then if that's not your normal course of action. You surprise people. She actually struck out at us, and she never does that. And that look of shock and horror is effective in its own right.
Yeah, that's
Well,
true. If you're not just a brawler,
Correct.
and finally somebody just has had enough and take it, then pounce.
It's like Gavin.
I'll never see it coming.
Gavin, our grandson, he goes to karate on a weekly basis, and one of the things that you see that is in the heart and life of his instructor is that he's a man of peace, and he teaches Gavin how to be very well disciplined. He teaches Gavin blocking techniques to where, if you're going to try to hit me, I can block. If you're going to take advantage of me, I can actually punch back, because I'm not giving you permission to disfigure my face or whatever. And so, this guy is a peacemaker, and I can't say that he's a man of violence, but I can say that don't push the guy too far, because he would stop you from putting his life on hold. Because I don't think that any of us need to put our life on hold simply because someone wants to pick up a gun or, pick up their dukes and try to do some of this. I don't think that we should do that. I think that it's better to push back at times. And so I'm not convinced that there is a quick answer for all of this. I think it's all over the place. And so in principle, I agree with your mom and father. I think that being a peacemaker and being a person who doesn't strike back, I think there are beautiful points to see in that narrative, but I also see that wonderful people like your mother have no bad intent in saying at some point you've got to take 2 little fingers and say, okay, don't pinch me anymore. I see that as well. And so I think this is a very good discussion to have, simply because here in the United States of America, we have people who are committing violent acts against each other all the time. And I think in principle what they need to learn is a bit of balance. I think they need to be trained, that is psychologically and sociologically. This is why I think NCG is such a wonderful place to be, because we don't want to strip people of their belief sets. We want to, in a sense, challenge belief sets with other belief sets and suggest that we can be much variegated, that is, in our approach. We can be multi-axial, if you will. We don't have to look at things in black and white. We can see the gray areas. We can see the multi, issues of color and the spectrums and all of that. And so we can see that the cat is both alive and dead at the same time. We can have thought experiments that deal with conundrums. And this is one thing that Bob Graves is so wise at doing, He's wise enough to say that in life we have so many conundrums that we're not willing to admit to. We have so many beliefs that are innate. We didn't learn them. They just came with who we are. And this is something that Bob is very good at in saying, hey, you've got to consider this and that. You just can't get into a philosophical argument and think that it's all black and white. Quit, setting up the chess match to win the game. In other words, yeah, very wise. We're almost out of time. What say you?
Well, I just want to talk about Barbara Bush for.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I'd like to talk about her because, go ahead.
you're not going to rain on my parade, are you?
I hope not, because I think that she was a marvelous, wonderful person. I think that she stands as a figure in history where women would not say anything. She comes out and she says the right things. When a mother would not hug her own child because her child had
HIV.
HIV, and Barbara Bush is there saying, well, you may not be able to hug that child. That baby needs some love. I admire that. That's courage. That's willing. That's a
Yeah.
person who is willing to cross the bridge into a zone that she says, even though I may get it, this baby needs it anyway.
Right.
And I see that as a
That's
wonderful person.
Why I wear my pearls,
Right.
fake pearls like Barbara,
Are those fake?
obviously. But, she took up for her family, she took up for her country, and, that family dynasty, I guess, they weren't always on the right side of history or the issues,
Right.
but, I think they did the best with what they knew to do. Made mistakes, but they were always there to bolster each other and help. And I loved her because she was, she had a lot of humor and
Right.
she had a quick wit. I mean, she didn't mind, if you were after her child, she didn't care who you were, even if they were 40 or 50 years old, she would say something, and she was probably a little caustic at times, but it's incredible, that she was the wife and mother of a president. She descended, from Franklin Pierce. So that's pretty cool, I think. But the reason about the turn the other cheek situation is Roger Stone, who is or was a compadre of our president. He made a lot of disparaging remarks against her right after her death. I mean, just like, she was a vicious woman and she was a drunk, and if they cremated her, her body would burn for 3 days. And, and he said that she's said many bad things about him. So that got me to thinking, well, it's easy to lash back, but why say those things, right after somebody's, wife and mother?
Well, I mean, I don't know of anyone who would suggest that Roger Stone has wisdom. The guy seems to be very good when it comes to entertainment. Let's say the type of wrestling that's set up, he can do that very well. I mean, that's what he's after, and at a time like this, it's certainly time to do unto him like this. I mean, if he's on a certain channel, turn the channel. I mean, I wouldn't give that guy the time of day simply because he's just all mouth and no ears.
Another thing I want to bring out about the funeral that I watched for the most part yesterday was our First Lady. She was there, and she brought with her two as invited guests, and this is incredible to me, two of the house staff, I think a butler, maybe two butlers, that were in service during 41's tenure,
Right.
and while they were at the White House, and she brought them with her so they could pay respects to Barbara. And I thought that was a cool thing to do.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that was a really, really, really cool thing to do.
Instead of tapping on the politicians. This is a place that I wish Americans would come to. I'm not a big fan of Bush philosophy when it comes to politics, but I'm a huge fan of what they were as a family. I mean, they were able to get along for reasons that are meaningful to them, and I applaud that. I applaud people who form deep relationships, and so I hope that everyone here at NCG can learn to say, I love the Obamas. They're wonderful people. I love the Bush family. I love the Clintons. Politically, you may not like where they're at, but let's look at these people in terms of who they are as human beings.
Right. There's
And-
still families
right.
that have to deal with family situations. No one is exempt from, things like that. And so I think we need to have a little more compassion toward all of them, past and present.
I think even the point could be made in the context in which Jesus was speaking about, because in chapter 5 he says, don't just love your neighbors, love your enemies. If people would say, I may not like the rhetoric of Donald Trump, I may not like his shock jock style, but why can't you love the person? This is a challenge. When you come to love the person, it gives you advantages. Why create within your world a reason for conflict? In other words, I don't agree with Aaron Ra in most of what he says, but I love the guy. I'm not trying to create conflict. I'm trying to create connection, because I want to be more and more connected to good people like Aaron Ra. And I think over time, I think that our differences, that's fine to have differences, because this is pluralistic, and we need to have people who have different opinions, and this is the way that life needs to be lived. And so we don't have to share the same viewpoint, but we certainly can learn how to have a discussion without slapping each other on the face or pulling one another's beard or spitting on them. And so I think that the politics today, they do slap each other in a different way. It's more bitch slapping in a sense, right?
I don't know what that means.
Well, I've heard that it means a lot of the ways that people are disparaged, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But my point is, I think that we can move on past that and still love the people, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, let's try to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Okay, are we out of here?
Diana, did you have... I thought you raised your hand.
Oh, no, I just, as a bit of emphasis, when Dr. Jones made his last comment, I tapped the desk in agreement.
Gotcha.
So you don't like what I said, right?
I love what you've said, really. Well, I am reminded of Ecclesiastes. There is a time to build up, there is a time to break down, there is a time for war, there is a time for peace. Everything in its own time, in its own way, because if you use the wrong thing at the wrong time, it does not make anything any better.
Yeah,
I agree.
absolutely.
Daryl, tell us how we can all get along.
Well, when the things I heard about Barbara Bush that were meaningful to me was that it seemed like she related to people in a very kind and in a way that they spoke well of her. And I think that is a very admirable trait when you've got that many people that knew you personally that speak well of you. And I know a lot of people like that, and I have a real appreciation for, that sort of characteristics in a person.
Yeah, absolutely too.
I agree.
All right, we are then out of here. And so we will see you next week on This Versus That.
Let me make a comment before Jack goes to playing our outro. I wrote this week, and it's part of what I've been saying for years. I said, I'm committed to a process, not a conclusion, not an ism of any kind, not a point of view, nor just one cup of coffee. Not just committed to one cup, okay? To be clear, I'm not even in love with my viewpoint. I think that nuances a lot. I'm not in love with my viewpoint. So many people are so in love with their viewpoint, and I think that's why they become apologists or defenders of their viewpoint. I would rather be committed to a process rather than being so in love with my viewpoint. I think you got the point. But I find my viewpoint to be very useful, but it's not an anchor. That's good stuff, isn't it? Mm-hmm. My viewpoint is simply something to work with. It's simply filled full of all kinds of amazing things that I can use so I can explore the past, the present, and possibly what's in the future. And so, with that said, we need you. We need you to be committed to a process, not a conclusion. Why? Because in being like that, becoming a part of the NCG mindset, not just mindset, but it's a model. It's a model of being multi-axial, looking at things from various vantage points. This is how humanity can work together and become a better form of humanism. But that said, we're out of here. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.